The very first science fiction book I ever remember reading as a kid is 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. I actually read it in the year 2001. I think that's why it caught my eye on the shelf of my middle school library. I wanted to know what a person from the 60s imagined 2001 would be like. And I distinctly recall the uncanny feeling of reading a story that's supposed to be set in the future, but it is my present. There's a certain reconciling your brain is always trying to do with like the technology that they thought would be available in the time. We don't have flying cars. We haven't terraformed Mars, but we do have these weird little supercomputers that we carry around in our pockets, and those don't show up in the story. And I think in a way, these misalignments between actual present and imagined future allow for the settings of these older science fiction tales to still feel maybe not futuristic, but elsewhere, removed from our present. And it might not feel like the future in the way that it would have to a contemporary Clarke reader, but it still feels maybe like an alternate timeline. Now, the experience of reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which was published in 1993, set in the mid-2020s, our present day, because it's so prescient in so many ways, the word uncanny doesn't even begin to describe it. I would say it's chilling. So Parable of the Sower is set in Robledo, California, which is a fictional suburb of the Los Angeles area, somewhere in the sort of Pasadena area where Octavia Butler herself grew up. And in this version of 2025, the effects of climate change are no longer debated, they're simply endured. Drought has caused immense water shortages, unchecked inflation and unemployment have led to widespread poverty and homelessness. Public services have eroded and been corrupted. Greedy corporations are hoarding resources and luring desperate people into indentured servitude. And to make matters worse, there's a brand new drug called pyro, which compels people to start fires, exacerbating the spread of wildfires across an already decimated land. Our 15-year-old protagonist, Lauren Oya Olamina, lives in a gated community with her family, which is relatively peaceful and safe until one day raiders come and destroy it, and she's forced, along with a few other people, to flee north looking for a better home. And the journey is already a dangerous one, but it's made even more dangerous for Lauren, who has a condition called hyperempathy, where she experiences the sensory feeling of other people's pain and pleasure. But let's be honest, it's mostly a world of pain, so it ends up being a debilitating condition for her. But this condition also makes her uniquely well-suited to lead people and to form a new community based around her new belief system or religion called Earthseed. More on that in a bit. Now, I'm currently living in Los Angeles, not too far from the area where a lot of the events of this book take place. And when I read specifically that passage about the firestorm, which was, like a tornado of fire roaring around, just missing us, playing with us, then letting us live, that sent chills down my spine because it immediately brought me back to earlier this January when the fires engulfed pieces of Altadena and the Pacific Palisades. It's like she even got the year and place right. That in combination with so much else in this book, when we'll go into that in the discussion coming up in a bit, it really is tempting to look at this and call Octavia Butler some sort of prophet or visionary. But she herself would probably not have used those words. She would call herself observant. She was looking at the trends of the time and imagining what might happen in this country and in the world if we continue down a path of self-destruction. This book gets super dark at times, and there were definitely moments where I struggled to read the unflinching depictions of violence and suffering. But also, I think at the core of this book is a radical kind of hope and optimism. In many ways, it's a survival manual that insists that survival is not enough, that in the face of the most extreme forces of destruction and subjugation, one can still build something better. It's that radical action of planting seeds while everything is burning around you. And that idea is actually sort of the foundational mission behind Lauren's new religion, Earthseed. You can read this as a dystopia, as a utopia, as a coming-of-age story, a speculative theology. However you choose to read it, I think Octavia Butler's words, the power and the potency of this story are undeniable. I really look forward to discussing this with my friend Grace Yost in the discussion coming up. But first, I want to let you know that this book club and everything on this channel is made possible by my patrons on Patreon. This is a place where you can vote for the next title in the book club, join the Discord community, or just keep up on the latest news about this book club and other things that I get up to. Thanks so much to everyone on Patreon for making this club and everything else I do possible. Okay.
I don't think they can hear that.
Welcome back to Elle's Science Fiction Book Club. I'm Elle Cordova.
I'm Grace Yost.
And we are here discussing Parable of the Sower this month. The Octavia E. Butler classic of climate disaster, economic collapse, the near future America that we seem to be on a collision course with soon, if not already.
Terrifyingly prescient, yes.
Yeah. Oh, look how pristine your copy is. Mine is it's been through the wars.
Did you order it the same time I did?
No,
okay.
I've had this for a while. So this is a reread for me.
Oh, okay.
Like
it looks
I've
in
spilled,
distress.
Yeah, I've spilled numerous cups of water and coffee on it, I think. And it's lived in my backpack, which is it's a terrifying place for a book. So
that just means you have read it well, shall we say.
I mean, the books in my possession know that they're loved. These books are not in good condition, but they're loved. So.
They can't tell because they're not zoomed in far enough to see all the damage.
It's probably good. Well, let's talk about Parable.
Yeah.
The first Parable in this series, which was supposed to be a 3 or 4 book even series that I think Octavia E. Butler was planning and before she was untimely taken from us at the age of 58, which is really unfortunate. But we did get Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. And this is probably her most famous work.
Yeah.
Certainly a masterpiece. Do you want to do a quick summary?
Sure. So the book centers on Lauren Oya Olamina, if I'm not mistaken. That's right. A precocious young teenager. We meet her first when she's in this gated community, very fragile yet peaceful existence in the neighborhood that is shattered eventually when people from the outside come in and destroy it. She loses her family and then sets out on this amazing road trip to found a new community. And we meet all these different characters along the way, and they kind of have this utopian project of creating a better, different community, one that they stop clinging to the past and they look toward a new and exciting future based on her new religious belief that she calls Earthseed.
Yeah. So one of the things that strikes me immediately about this book is that just how prescient it is. It's as if Octavia Butler was just predicting our maybe a slightly heightened and worse version of 2025. It's really eerie reading this book in 2025. This book ended up on the bestsellers list, on the New York Times bestseller list for the first time in its entire publication history. I think it was in 2020. Let me look this up actually. Oh, so it was actually in 2020 that it reached the bestseller list, probably during the pandemic.
And then maybe in the wake of the George Floyd was, what year was that?
Yeah, that was 2020.
Okay,
yeah. So the sort of in the culmination of the pandemic and the George Floyd protests and everything, it was so relevant in 2020 and even maybe more so now in our climate moment with the current administration sort of rolling back environmental protections, and we're seeing the erosion of a lot of our government institutions. So there's just so much that's resonating in this book, I think, for anyone, especially for like Americans reading this right now, and then really anyone. So
absolutely, and especially because it seems to me that in the beginning of the book, it's very clear that the main cause of the current terrible predicament is failure to prevent and then failure to adapt enough in time for climate change. So climate change is the big thing that has destroyed the United States.
Right.
Perhaps not other countries to the same degree, but certainly the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the major problem. And all of a sudden you don't have easy access to water. And then inflation makes it so you don't have access to all the types of technology you used to have access to. That's a major part of this.
And then also the confluence of, a drug epidemic, the sort of mistrust of government officials like police, sort of breaking down. They're not funded properly, so then they can't be trusted to come in time for emergencies, and sometimes they're, corrupt. So, there's that. And then beyond it just being prescient, I also think about the context in which Octavia Butler was writing, where she's extrapolating from. So she published this in 1993. This is in the wake of the Rodney King decision, kind of leading to the LA riots, the LA uprising. So there's a lot of violence in LA. She grew up in and was writing in LA, or sort of Pasadena, I think the Pasadena area, which is kind of where this book takes place. Mm-hmm. So I think fresh in her mind is, a lot of these things, a lot of the racial struggle and environmental concerns. She was really concerned about the defunding of educational programs. Obviously there's this distrust of police during that time and continuing into our time. So a lot of things going on sort of in the soup in which she's writing here.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think she there's an interview included there's a reader's guide if you have this edition, and they ask Octavia Butler some questions. And she does talk about kind of extrapolating forward. So we have a number of things. We talk about climate change, the fire, the absolutely dangerous fire that almost wipes our ragtag band of characters out. We have, of course, the Rodney King incident and the acquittal of the officers involved and ensuing protests over that decision. And then the opioid epidemic, which you just referenced. And I find this quote interesting. This is on page 347. Where the interviewers ask her, what would you like readers to get from this novel? What would you like them to think about? And she writes, I hope people who read Parable of the Sower will think about where we seem to be heading. We, the United States, even we, the human species, where are we going? What sort of future are we creating? Is it the kind of future you want to live in? If it isn't, what can we do to create a better future individually and in groups? What can we do? Mm-hmm. And she offers one answer here with his radical reconfiguring of religion and community life. Mm-hmm. But kind of like an intensification that happens to take place at our present. So very weird to be reading this when we have kind of similar things. We also have ongoing conversations about police brutality. We're very worried about climate change. We're filming this in LA, and as everyone knows, there were recently devastating fires.
Yes.
That, in that. So reading that feels very eerie.
I think reading that, especially that scene where they're running from that firestorm, it was just nightmare. It was so relevant, and it just really, I think, for anyone, especially in LA in 2025, reading this, it was just really resonant.
Absolutely. And I think also in LA, the issues of the opioid epidemic, I think in most cities in the US, if you live in a city in the US, you will be familiar with the evidence that we are going through an opioid epidemic with people who are clearly suffering in the midst of this. And in LA, it's very, very clear that this is an issue that we just haven't found a good solution for. Mm-hmm. And of course, she's intensifying this with the issue, hyperempathy, the sort of more speculative element, but it, I think, resonates with the contemporary reader. So
she has two different types of drugs that she mentions in the book. There's the one that her mother was using, which was sort of like an ADHD or brain enhancing treatment that would make people smarter, more focused. You had to take it in order to even compete in society. So she was taking that while pregnant with Lauren, and so then it results in her hyperempathy. There's also the drug pyro, which gives people this intense pleasure around watching things burn. So that it's accelerating the already devastating effects of climate change with people intentionally setting fires and burning down communities, just contributing to the general lawlessness of the land.
Right, terrifying imagery there, and then I'm sure we'll talk more about, or do we talk now about hyperempathy?
Yeah, let's talk about hyperempathy. Yeah. So Lauren has this thing that enables her to feel other people's pain and pleasure, but of course it's a world in which she's mostly feeling pain.
Yeah.
People are mostly feeling pain. So she speaks of it. It's interesting because she speaks of it mostly as like a disability.
Right.
But one could also see it in a way as a as a superpower. There's one point in the book where she's actually saying, if only, or somebody says, if only everybody had this,
Right.
that could be a solution. You know, if we all could feel each other's pain, maybe we would be more careful with each other. And I kind of see it that way. It's not necessarily, I can see how it is a disability in this society because it makes her very vulnerable, but it also gives her, in a way, like insight into, it makes her a perfect person to start this new utopian society.
Well, right, because it's like, well, Lauren is already an empathetic person she's a good person in general, and she cares about other people. And then also on this visceral level, she can, literally feel their pain. And so then, and yet she cares so much about the other members of her community, the members of the group that she's forming.
And her family.
She cares so much about them that she's willing to experience devastating pain to protect them. So she's like still willing to do that. But then, it's and you compare her with her kind of psychopathic brother, Keith,
yes,
who has absolutely zero care for anyone else besides really himself. I guess he gives some gifts to his siblings and his mom, but he's just
more as a flex.
Yes.
Look what I was able to do that Dad wasn't able to do.
Yes, exactly. And just out there, harming people, just stealing people, killing people, taking from them. And Lauren's horrified by that. And then you have Lauren, who's the opposite. And I don't know, I was just thinking about the hyper empathy. I was thinking about this because relatively recently, a friend of ours, Toni Lindgren, fantastic guitar player, I'm sure many people know about this, had a little... to be like kitchen misadventure? Is that how you would characterize that?
Yeah.
A kitchen misadventure that led to her really, really hurting her thumb. And she was telling me about this, and I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
I was feeling like, or I don't know, like if you experienced this, but I was feeling like faint, and I felt like my own thumb, I don't know. So in that little moment, so I was thinking about that while reading this book, but then like actually being able to feel it as it is happening to that person experiencing it yourself, what a very difficult disability that would be to have, especially in a world where people are getting hurt all the time.
Yeah.
In our world, it would still be awful, but even worse there.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see how she navigates that. And she has to make these quick calculations about what am I going to be able to do before I'm incapacitated by this person's pain.
Right. And disclosing that to other people and
Yes.
realizing that could make them not want you in their group.
Or just it gives them power over you.
Right.
The second they know, they can easily hurt you.
Right. And then there's the discussion of, corporate slavery, slavery of various, the companies taking over towns and basically turning them into this miserable, kind of like sharecropper, almost like it's essentially slavery. Yeah.
It's a new slavery.
Right.
Yeah.
And very
new
disturbing.
and old, because this is this idea of the company town sort of owning everything, including the people and their time and their labor. It's not a new idea, but it's something that we don't see it. We don't see it everywhere these days. This is it still happens in sweatshops and places in the world, but it seems like in this novel, it's really come back to sort of be a large part of society.
Right. And then if you find yourself in that position, if you are a sharer, as they say, so if you have hyper empathy, then you are a desirable in the slavery system because they can very easily control you, not even just through hurting you, but any pain around you will experience as your own.
Exactly.
So very much a vulnerability that...
And we see that in those other two characters that have a hyper empathy that join her band of... her not so merry band of travelers later.
Not so merry band of travelers, yeah.
Yeah, you see them how they are they're sort of skittish, and
Yes.
they've been hurt in the past, and they've escaped those environments where they were probably enslaved, or they were working for these companies. So yeah, and they really don't trust anyone, so they are very careful to guard that secret, even from
Yes.
Lauren.
Yeah.
So.
And then she kind of creates at a certain point, if you are trying to build a new community, you do have to have trust and invest in the group. And she tells that. She also tells Bancole that, and just to put all her cards on the table.
Yeah.
So that's a more speculative element of a book that we are in fact reading in the science fiction book club, but this is maybe indicative of our expansive definition of the term science fiction.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily reduce this to just a science fiction novel. It's clearly many things. It's a dystopia. Obviously, you could also make the arguments that it's a utopian novel because that's the goal, is to set up a sort of a utopia, and she kind of arrives maybe at the beginnings of that at the end of the book, and of course. We see what happens later. I think the next book, Parable of the Talents, takes place like 5 years later, and certainly isn't a utopia. But yeah, there's that. You could also see this as sort of there's a theological element to this book.
Right.
You could also see it as a sort of a future history, or she's considered to be like the mother of Afrofuturism.
Right.
So there are a lot of elements to it, but
I just on the note of it being dystopian.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by, works of fiction that take place like right at this teetering, like the beginning is on this teetering, we're teetering on the precipice of things still kind of being normal. Like, I own this house, I inherited this property, I'm in this community, and maybe some bad things are happening, people are getting robbed, but we still have kind of a semblance of order. And that's like the vision that her father, the Baptist, right, is committed to preserving.
yes.
And then Lauren doesn't have memories of what things used to be like, and it's very clear to her that can never be recovered, and she's like moving in this other direction. But it's interesting, like at what point people decide to, okay, I need to leave and go somewhere else. That becomes the foundation of her religion, which we're about to talk about, and then people feeling attached to the past. And I'm reminded of The Last of Us, the video game. I'm a true fan. I played the games before I saw the TV show. I say that not to gatekeep fandom of that, but in the video game, if you played the first one, Joel, the older character, remembers the older characters in that remember the past, and you have a younger character who they don't have any. They're like interested, but they're like, it just seems so alien, and they are maybe almost better prepared in a way to move in a different direction. They don't have those attachments.
Yeah, I think we see that really in this case with Lauren and her dad. They're of similar mindsets. They both are shepherds kind of a flock of people. People look to them for leadership. They're providing protection and organizing community in a really, a way that really works. But there's only so long that her dad can really keep that up. That's at some point, and Lauren sees early on that, like, at some point, no matter how careful they are, the world has disintegrated to such a point that they're eventually everything they've built will be lost. And she knows we need to prepare for this. He's not ready to do it because, like you said, he's too rooted in the past. He wants all the adults in the book. They're just imagining maybe one day the good times will come back because they remember they remember that. And so it takes the young people. It takes people like Lauren to really set up a new society because they don't have those attachments.
Right. And she has that, there's that sort of heartbreaking part in the beginning of the book where she's talking to Joanne and sharing like, hey, I think we should be reading up on all this stuff. I think
like
we're
how
going to need
the Native Americans would use, acorns to make flour,
right,
to bake things. And and Lauren and her dad do that. Like, we can learn from these books, and we can learn from the ancient ways, like indigenous knowledge. And we should be preparing with that now.
And her dad does agree with her to some extent, but is, like, okay, let's try not to, I don't want to panic people.
Exactly.
Which is right. But he's also not willing, like, she's kind of thinking like, I don't think we can stay in this community with this giant, like you have walls which are safe, but if you have a neighborhood with houses and walls, that's going to look appealing.
You have something to protect.
Right.
You have gardens and you have possessions. Yeah.
And just as she thinks, we need to get out of here and find a new place that isn't such a huge target, it's replicated in her belief that ultimately we need to leave this planet and find something else. We need to move to a different place. But I do find that element, taking place earlier in the disintegration of society and then many dystopian works take place, because it's right. Like, there's still a president, there's still police, there's still firefighters, there's still the army, but these systems are straining and they're no longer effective and they're kind of losing meaning, but they're still kind of existent in some way.
Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily call this a post-apocalyptic tale. It's like apocalypse in motion, and it seems to be headed toward like full collapse. But we're sort of, like you said, the society is still functioning in some way. You can still spend money. You can still buy things with money. It's just that money, inflation is so bad that it now takes a couple $1,000s to go into a store and buy basic supplies.
Right. It's kind of like that thing that everyone always mentions with was it like frogs boiling? It's such a gross metaphor, but the heat turning up very slowly and then not realizing until it's too late that you need to go. Unless you're precocious Lauren who clocks it and realizes, and if only she had left slightly earlier, maybe Curtis could have gone with her, maybe her family.
Well, if people just listened to her,
Right.
Yeah. She's like the ultimate like oldest sibling.
Oh,
She's
I
like
know.
oldest sibling to the max.
Yes.
Just precocious, taking care of everybody. In that way, she's a lot like her dad. And it's interesting because clearly she's taken a lot of wisdom from her dad, who is a Baptist preacher, and even just her philosophy, her belief system that she's developing throughout the book, Earthseed, her religion, it's clearly borrowing a lot from sort of the monotheistic Christianity that her dad preaches about. Even the idea of the parable of the sower, and
right.
That's where Earthseed comes from. The idea that seeds need to be spread and find their fertile ground, to grow. So we should talk about her religion, because that's really sort of at the heart of the novel.
Yes.
The whole novel is a series of journal entries by Lauren. It's part autobiography, where she's kind of talking about her life and her personal experiences, but also snippets of verses that are from her books of the living, her like religion.
Right. So that's interesting. So somebody who grows up, in religious circles is once again turning to religion as a source of comfort and a guidance for a way to live, but is creating their own religion, but is attached to the idea of verses. Parable itself is an interesting title, sort of of course, we're thinking first of the stories that Jesus uses in the New Testament to explain various concepts to people, right? And then she mentions that her favorite book of the Bible is the book of Job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of gives you I read that and I thought, I think this is going to be a downer. That's the sort of references to, of course, the book where Job is put through various trials by God, and it's the whole thing is to illustrate the importance of faith, even if horrible things are happening in your life, which Lauren still maintains her faith, even though she loses a lot of people she loves throughout this story.
But she has to invent a new version of God that kind of reconciles all of the misery and destruction around her with the idea that still there is a force to be believed in and followed and shaped, really. So we should read that one verse about God as change.
Yes.
Because that is the sort of the fundamental philosophy, I think. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. So she also references the second law of thermodynamics, which is it's about entropy and basically the same principle that everything is moving from a state of order to a state of chaos. Heat cools down to cold. Eventually everything, we're in a constant state of change, and eventually there'll be like the heat death of the universe. She doesn't go that far, but that's the end. So I think a lot of it is like, she's reconciling how could any God who is actively involved in the affairs of our world be benevolent, if all of these things are allowed to happen. God, for her is a force that you can shape. You can actively participate in what God is.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this version, you as the believer have agency. But in, a lot of the Christian belief system, you can pray for people. You can use your faith to endure bad things, like as in the book of Job. But there is very little you can actually do. You're just going to be in the suffering, and your solace is that in Christianity that Jesus died for your sins and you're going to escape this world of evil and then be in a better place. Here, this is more like, hey, we can do something now to improve things. So rather than when I was first reading about it, because this kind of like, this book does remind me of The Left Hand of Darkness in a number of ways, that we have this sort of, in here, it's the verses, and that's the only other text that's interwoven, unlike Left Hand of Darkness, which has a number of other things interwoven. But it's kind of a similar thing that we're getting verses in this context.
Well, both authors were inspired by the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah, I saw that.
So
yeah,
it's interesting. They're both kind of Taoist.
Yes.
There's a Taoist sort of underpinning to both.
Yeah. And like Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia Butler has a really cool name. That's one.
They're both insanely cool names.
Yes. I was thinking about that.
I'm so jealous.
I know. So, but also in a more meaningful way, like in that book, we're sort of slowly. She's not in a rush to fill us in on everything. So when I was first reading about Earthseed, I was like, oh, is this just like another word for fate? You're just being like tossed about and whatever. You just have to deal with it. But no, there's agency. I'm going to steer this. And that can make you feel like you have more control rather than just, well, I guess you just have to deal with whatever you get, whatever happens to you.
And if you choose not to try to intervene or not to shape God as a force will move without you, and it may not be in your benefit. And she kind of talks about that too. You can let things happen, or you can actively try to create the world that you want to create.
Yeah, it's really an interesting idea.
Yeah. What I struggle with, and I think if I'm going to be critical, is I don't really understand why in this context we would need to go to space to establish, like, how is it easier and in this world where resources are so scarce to imagine that somehow, they're in the process of defunding their space program, although their space program is further along than our current space program.
Right.
They're on Mars. There's colonization happening. But the idea of like taking the very limited resources that they do have when society is crumbling all around and trying to go to space and developing the technology that it would take to get you to like Alpha Centauri or anywhere where there would be like another Earth sustaining planet, that would just be it would seem so impossible. And why would that, like, where is that coming from? The need to go to space.
I wonder if it's because the perception is this planet has been too damaged by climate change and eventually it will become completely unlivable. So because I think she realizes like this isn't going to be something like we're immediately going to go north and then I'll start working on the space program. I think she realizes it's
generations later.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's what and there's like, it's nice to have a goal ahead of you instead of, I think an extension of we can't cling to this civilization, can't cling to the gated community.
Like we need to burn down everything and start anew.
Right. That it just no longer makes sense. The older religious system no longer makes sense. The way society is structured no longer makes sense. But yeah, that to me, I wonder if there's more about that in the second novel.
Yeah, which neither of us have actually read.
Right.
And I really want to read Parable of the Talents. But yeah, I think I understand it on a symbolic level. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like not burn everything down, but leave it behind.
Right.
In the way that a seed leaves the tree behind and starts its own journey elsewhere, plants itself elsewhere. I get it symbolically. I just think like really on the level of like, how would this happen? It seems really impossible and far-fetched and unnecessary. But
yeah, I don't know. It's hard to imagine, but I think it is good to have some kind of goal instead of just survival.
Yeah, exactly.
Some kind of philosophical thing, even if it's way out in the future, because who knows how successfully they might be able to build this community,
Yeah, and this is coming from, again, somebody who I have always believed in the space program project.
Look at her mug.
I know, like, yeah. I wish that we would spend more money on our space program, and it makes me really sad to see the cuts that are happening for NASA and everything now. So, yeah, I'm someone very sympathetic to the cause of that. I just think like in this context, it would seem crazy, I'm sure, to her fellow followers initially, like the idea of going to space to find a new home.
I think like this whole religion it sounds kind of crazy to people. And that's why Lauren is quite right to keep it under her hat for a little, like, come along with me, and then soon I'll tell you about my weird little beliefs, you know?
Yeah.
But then
She does it really
Yes.
beautifully. She waits until they kind of come to her and they ask her questions.
oh, I'm just going to read you some poetry, and it you know, gives you comfort. It's, you know, beautiful, and then I think even though people are kind of pushing back, there's something like, I don't know, sort of arresting about this like young, extremely capable person with these huge ideas. She's, you know, charismatic. She's a natural leader.
Wise beyond her years.
Yeah. Would you join her in her group?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't be critical. I think what she's doing is useful to a lot of people. I don't necessarily, I wouldn't subscribe to all of her beliefs. I would be critical of the idea that we need to like throw resources into trying to get to space immediately, although she's not saying immediately. But, you know, I think, yeah, I would be inclined to trust her partially because of her hyper empathy.
Yep.
I like to imagine that in this world, I would also have hyper empathy. I'm often in this world disabled by my own empathy. So, like,
Right.
yeah, like you were mentioning with Toni's cut to her thumb, that actually felt like that happened to me. I was there, so I saw the blood, and it was not good. I was almost disabled by that. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know. Would you join Lauren's group?
Yeah, I think if there was I think I would, you know, I think she told me about this. I'd be like,
Good for you, though.
Good for you, though. Yeah.
I'm glad that you're writing poetry.
Love that.
Love
the
that.
poetry.
Share,
Love that for you.
Share the poetry with me. I might not believe everything to the letter.
Could I be a secular Earthseed person?
Well, it kind of is a secular religion.
Right.
Like,
Actually,
as far as religions go, it's pretty secular.
and I think I would find it useful. Be like, okay, so our alternatives are despair, or like, or we could have this. Here's this charismatic person who has a goal and a plan, and has, you know, especially if you encounter her when there's already like several. She has this nice group of people that feel like pulled toward her, especially because she's kind and helps people and takes, you know, puts herself in danger to help other people.
Yeah.
I think I would see that and I'd be intrigued.
And there's really nothing in there that she's saying that seems like just wrong to me. Like, I can see, yeah, God has changed. I understand how that could be useful. You know, that helps people kind of create the community they want to create. That's all seems good to me.
Right. And there's sort of like internally consistent in a way that a lot of other religions, where the text is multi-authored and rife with internal contradictions. This is one person's immediate understanding of her situation.
Hey there, book clubbers. Elle here, interrupting our discussion briefly to bring you to the observation deck. This is a place where people can send in their thoughts, and we might feature them here. This month's observation comes from Ava R., who is reflecting on the usefulness of Earthseed as a belief system in a time of turmoil. Ever since reading this book, I can't help but wonder if our world needs something like Lauren Olumina's Earthseed right now. Genocide, environmental crises, the persecution of others. Maybe these can't be solved by divine authority, but by a philosophy that makes us all responsible for the world we are creating.
Yeah, I think I would be down. Although, you know, I don't know what I would do in this situation. I'd probably be so cowardly. I'd probably like go to that town that like Joanne's family goes to.
I would not.
You don't think you'd go?
I would rather try to duke it out on my own. I think Lauren is totally right to realize like that is just signing up for
Slavery,
yeah. A new form of slavery, right?
I think it's hard though, because in that you're deciding how much you want to trade for a feeling of security, whether you really believe things will be secure.
And terrible things do happen because she doesn't, you know, they don't sign up.
Right.
They
That's
don't
true.
apply. And then she has to watch her mom and brothers or not her mom's already dead.
She doesn't see
stepmom.
them.
Right. That's
Zara
true.
sees them. Although I read far enough into the afterword to get a bit of a spoiler for the next book. So maybe I shouldn't say, but
Okay.
should I say? No, maybe not.
Don't say.
I won't say.
Yeah. In case people haven't read
Right.
Parable of the Talents yet. But yeah, she has to witness so many terrible, terrible things because of the decision not to apply for that safety. So it is a trade-off. Like, are you willing to sell yourself into bondage basically for security?
And do you join a group, or do you just kind of stick with, just like a couple of people that you really trust? And do you just kind of, or do you glom onto a larger group?
Yeah. And I found myself, through Lauren's eyes, not trusting anyone. I was worried every time there'd be like a new person showing up in her group. I was worried about that person. I didn't know what to think of Bankole when he first shows up. I'm like, oh, is this stranger going to be good or bad? Mm-hmm. He's this charismatic, seemingly very friendly man, and it turns out that he is a really good person. But you just can't trust anyone,
Yeah, except like everyone she encounters, she's actually right about.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because she's
hyper
Right.
empathic.
possibly like, or it's like not, I don't know, it's like doesn't seem to extend to, at least in an overt way, to understanding people's characters, but
She is good at that.
she
though.
is good.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's related to that. It would not surprise me if it were, but she kind of implicitly understands. Like she understands Bankole has something that he's hiding, but nothing. I don't feel like it's really terrible,
Right.
and that's true.
Right. And I can also understand why he wouldn't want to just come into this group and invite everybody to his land,
Of course not. Right.
Yeah, he wouldn't do that. Until you realize, like, oh, there's maybe a bigger project going on here that is worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you surprised when they got to the location to find that his family had died, his sister?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of the like horrible deaths in the book, like her father and then her brother earlier.
Well, we saw Keith coming, I think.
Oh yeah, well that was always gonna happen. But a lot of these deaths, there's never like you don't get to know really what happened.
Yeah.
They're, like the dads, it's devastating. They're like sifting through like body parts trying to figure out like where if and they never find him. She never gets any answers there. She doesn't get answers to. There's no definite answer of who killed Keith. Clearly, somebody who like that Keith hurt. But
or even really what Keith was doing. We know he was probably selling drugs or stealing. He was part of some sort of theft ring or something.
right,
But we don't know exactly. We don't have any of the details. And I think it's realistic that we would never find out what happens to her dad.
or what exactly happened to Bankole tries to talk to the police. There aren't answers. Who knows why things were burned, and then that opens up the question: should we stay here? Should we go?
Yeah, there's a really powerful moment where she goes back to find out what happened to her, if anyone survived, and to grab any resources she can, like her hidden money and stuff. And then the person is like, these people died for us, and just the rage that she feels.
Or wasn't it like it was the one of the bald, like there's a dead, like crazy woman who with the pyro.
Like, good for them that they burned this community down so that
they died for they did something. Like that woman is a hero, and
right?
she's
So that we can pick through the remains.
Right, and you're like
that would send you into a rage.
Right, and you're just like you're looting your own house next to other people who are stealing all your stuff and
watching them grab like
right.
your little brother's shoes and just
right. I mean, that's devastating, and that it's coming, and it's just unfortunate that like Lauren she wants to wait a little bit longer. She talks about leaving, but then she doesn't. It's like, and then they like there are all these ways they might have kind of avoided this, but then they don't.
Kind of. Yeah, I mean, there's not much they could have prepared better.
Well, they could have left is the thing. Like she was going to try to say, or she was going to leave, right? And then just give me a few more.
Well, then the Keith thing happened, so she had to deal with that, and and then she would have to take over her stepmom's classes. Like things kept coming up that would like delay her, and then she had to deal with these problems because she really cares about that community,
of course,
and they're not ready to leave with her, so she would have had to like escape on her own, and I just don't know. I think the only thing that would have made it happen is like it's just she had to leave. Everything got burned down. And it's interesting that like we really get that sense of like the growing threat as the novel progresses. Like it starts off, like you said, like it's not peaceful. There's the danger, constantly there. Like her dad is having to like once a week go to his teaching job. And, you know, there's the constant threat. They're having to walk out and see this destruction when they go to practice the shooting and everything. So it's very much there. But I think there's like the pitch is increasing on the danger throughout the novel. It's really well done. And then that sort of, you know, the sort of climate change and like the economic collapse, it's this background that's like almost a character in itself. And I think other people have said this in talking about the book, but it like really becomes, the environment becomes a big character, and it has moods. It'll have the, you know, the rainfall, which is this beautiful, you know, moment of free water. They're able to capture a bunch of it and just like, oh, I haven't experienced this in 7 years. And they're just like relishing in the water. And that's a really beautiful moment. And then, you know, the firestorm, just this angry, unfathomable power of nature to destroy.
Absolutely. I like that. The sort of one of their major antagonists, a non-person antagonist. And then, you know, other people, I don't know, I think the way she writes about like the dynamics of people are still like existing out in public with each other. And then you just have to be careful. I don't want to seem too vulnerable, because at any moment, this sort of collective agreement we have that we're not going to hurt each other could be fractured. And like when people suddenly run in and start looting a place, or there's an earthquake and suddenly, oh, that's like a weird thing. Now I'm going to go.
It's an opportunity for everything to collapse further.
Right.
It's like earthquakes, fault lines.
Yes.
One thing could happen and then everything kind of goes.
And people will be horrifically violent. Like there's a lot of sexual assault in this novel.
Yeah.
There's literal cannibalism here.
There's
murder.
Like
yes.
Band of children cannibals.
Child cannibals.
Yeah.
Or like dogs that have, you know, grown up in the wild and are just like, you know, wild, no longer domesticated.
Which brings me to an interesting question of, you know, this is a coming of age story in some ways. She's a teenager. She changes a bit throughout the book. We see her start as a person who, for the most part, is following her dad's teachings, and then sort of fractures from that, creates her own belief structure, and becomes a leader. So very much like a story of a person's development into adulthood, and then into a religious figure. But I wouldn't necessarily. Can we think of this as a young adult novel? And I noticed right away. At least on this edition, they have a blurb from John Green.
Oh.
Brilliant, endlessly rich, pairs well with 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale. And I think it's interesting they chose to put John Green and N.K. Jemisin, but like...
oh, look, we have different versions.
Oh, interesting.
Because I have LeVar on the top.
Oh, and I have the foreword from N.K. Jemisin. So this is an older version.
Oh, see, I have that. That is an afterword now. So I have Mr. Geordie LaForge himself.
So I didn't get to hear LeVar's take.
It was interesting.
Okay, maybe I'll borrow it from you.
Yeah.
But John Green, noted YA novelist. So interesting to put him on here.
Yeah. I think because some people define young adult fiction differently. I think one of the major requirements, if I'm not mistaken, is that the protagonist is a young adult, and that would check. But then there are some themes. But then, of course, the implication is that a young adult audience may enjoy this. And I think this book is beautiful and terrifying, and I don't
powerful.
Know. Powerful. But I would not hand this to like a 12-year-old.
No, not a 12-year-old. I think it would
be too much.
I mean, maybe an older teen though.
Yeah, I think an older teen. I think like if you're like late high school, I think would find this interesting.
It is a lot though. I mean, it's incredibly violent. It's really emotional.
Yeah.
Parts of it are really hard to read.
Yes. The devastation of the community. And then, you know, there's a sort of like Lauren has grown up in a very grim time. So she just isn't reacting the way that we would react. No, she's just a matter-of-factly discusses these things. It's always a possibility, you know, but it's like she doesn't receive it the way that, of course, we would receive it.
Well, we would receive it with just, it would be abject.
Yeah.
We would just, I don't know that I could survive this. I don't know that I'm a strong enough person. I think if I were in this community, I would be, I would not want to go sign up for what is the name of that company? It's like...
Well, it's at the town. It's a town. Yeah, they've taken over a town and are inviting people to go there. Kajimoto Stam Frampton and Company has taken over the running of a small coastal city called Olivar.
Oliver.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, I don't think I would have signed up for that, but I also don't know that I could survive outside the wall the way that Lauren is able to.
Maybe if you're like this hardened, it's like,
You'd have to be a hardened version of yourself that grew up in this world.
Yes, like Ellie in The Last of Us, where you're like, you've seen brutality. I kind of want more coffee, actually.
Okay, let's
Should
pause.
I get more coffee?
Let's pause.
What were we talking about before we were...
I don't know, but I wanted to go back to something you said about how it takes the younger generation who are not rooted in the better times to change things. I was remembering the exchange between her and Corey, where Corey says Lauren really enjoys looking at the stars, and the stepmom is saying, and Corey's saying, city lights, progress, growth, all those things were too hot and too poor to bother with anymore. When I was your age, my mother told me that the stars, the few stars we could see, were windows into heaven, windows for God to look through and keep an eye on us. I believed her for almost a year. And then Lauren, because they're talking about how the city lights aren't really drowning out many of the stars. And Lauren says, there are city lights now. They don't hide the stars. And then Corey shakes her head. There aren't anywhere near as many as there were. Kids today have no idea what a blaze of light cities used to be, and not that long ago. I'd rather have the stars, Lauren says. The stars are free. I'd rather have the city lights back myself. The sooner the better. But we can afford the stars. So the idea that like the more stars you're able to see, the more society has crumbled. Mm-hmm. Lauren loves seeing the stars because she doesn't know what was lost. She doesn't know how light pollution was a sign that, in fact, society was thriving then.
That's a really good encapsulation. I had forgotten about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. And Corey is like the dad, sort of attached to these things, and in fact, she's interested in well, what if we went to that community that's being taken over by the company to Olivar? Maybe we should do that, and looking for safety in at least like the illusion of what communities used to be, versus Lauren, who realizes that that's not something that we can have right now, and that also maybe some things, maybe there are benefits to other ways of living. It's interesting.
Yeah, I also think the bond that she shares with her dad over acorns come up a lot in this book, and it's sort of a symbol maybe of a couple things, of indigenous knowledge, because she learns about how to prepare acorns. The dad says something about like, well, people don't know how to prepare them because basically that knowledge has been lost. And a lot of people just don't have access to that sort of indigenous knowledge. Then the idea of acorns sort of like falling from far from the tree and being planted, she ends up naming her new land Acorn.
Right.
And then the end of the novel it ends with this celebration of life of the people they've lost, basically a funeral, and they plant a bunch of acorns to grow into oak trees to sort of celebrate those people.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot there with the acorns and the idea of seeding the earth and, seeds kind of flowing far from where they're from to start new, like, life.
It's got a nice continuity with, with the past, and because she really does value her father, even though she realizes, like, I can't get him to leave this behind. He's always going to want to preserve what we have instead of find a different and ultimately safer way of living, which is understandable. I can also understand wanting to preserve the community.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and maybe this goes back to my criticism, like, why would you need to go to the stars to start a brand new life? I'm sure her dad was thinking a similar thing. Why would you need to go leave our community behind to start a new life? We're safe here in this little walled community. Why spend the resources to get somewhere else and have to build it all over again? I guess her vision is like, this is just what we have to do to find new fertile ground to plant seeds.
Right. And also it's like living in, I think they're in the sprawling metro area of LA. Robledo, is that how you say that name?
Yeah, which is a fictional.
It's a fictional little, yeah.
It's supposed to be around the Pasadena area.
Okay, so around the city. So it's like anywhere in the metro area, it's just not, there's going to be high concentration of people. Then you're going to have those the bald people who are into the fire drug, pyro. They're going to be around. So you have to go further afield, and Bancole's land is perfect because it's hard to get to. Even then, it's not safe because, of course, his family unfortunately was killed. But it's better to be further away, and to build this really big fortress. Not to talk incessantly about The Last of Us, but that is like where is that? They have the safest place that they have constructed is like out in the middle of
Wyoming.
Right, but in order to be don't start in the metro area there. Of course, they have different challenges. They have the what they call them, the infected. But here it's the same kind of thing where you have like the pyro people aren't literally zombies, but they are sort of monstrous. They have completely moved away in a very terrifying way from any sort of social mores. They delight in the suffering of others. And then you have people scavenging in waves after them. You have to get far enough away. You're obviously going to be safer in a rural area.
Right. It's like the drug pyro. It's a way to have zombies in your story without actually having zombies in your story.
Right.
They basically work the same as the infected in The Last of Us. And another book that I think of when I read this is The Stand.
Yes.
I think of The Stand. I think of Handmaid's Tale. Just the idea of extrapolating what would happen if certain things continued on if we weren't prepared for certain things.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then it's interesting. Like in the Last of Us, you do learn not so much maybe less so in the TV show, but in the game. The most terrifying people are not the zombies.
Right, exactly.
The zombies are, in fact, kind of predictable in a certain way. And in here, like the pyro people are dangerous and awful, but it's almost more frightening just the people. Like when they're on the road.
Well, the companies and the people in power are really the most terrifying.
Because you don't know exactly what they're going to do. Or even like Lauren sizing up people on the road, being like, okay, those people are too interested in us. Are they going to leave us alone? Are they going to go after us?
Yeah.
There's like a certain comfort in knowing these people are vile. They're going to attack you. It'll be very clear cut. But should I trust this person or not? It's a more nerve-wracking proposition.
Yeah, the everyday encounter with other people in the store, outside the store, by the watering places.
And Lauren is right, I think 100% of the time.
Yeah.
In the people she's taking in, she's always right.
There's that, the younger couple that starts to kind of follow them, after they help them outside of the water station. The couple with the baby,
Right.
Yeah, and I feel like that's how it would go. You would want strength in numbers, but then that awkward stage of trying to figure out whether you can trust this group or these people.
Another through line in this book is sort of racism, a just huge surge in racist beliefs. They talk about it in a number of different ways. Like privilege attached to race, people kind of being suspicious of couples where one person is one race.
Like interracial couples.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. So do you think that is something in a disaster? Do you think that's a realistic thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, again, this is Octavia Butler being so gifted at extrapolation. I think she's right to think that it's not like, all these systems collapsing and is suddenly going to create a world, a post-race world. I think if anything, tensions get inflamed. And that's partly what makes their community vulnerable. They have an interracial community of people working together. You have people of various races working together. And I think, like you might have mentioned, Oliver, however you say it, is that it's like an affluent white community. And ostensibly there'll be greater danger for people of color that show up there.
Or maybe not, you wouldn't even be necessarily welcome, I think.
It's hard to say.
Details. Yeah. But I do think that is my read on that too. When there are disasters, then these like prejudices come leaping out. Like I think I like reading this from today, then you remember COVID-19 and despicable rhetoric circulating about Asian and Asian American people in the wake of that. Like there's a like emergency, or earlier the AIDS epidemic and the vile things that were said about particularly gay men at the time. This is a knee-jerk like regression.
And then obviously violence against women,
right,
becomes a huge factor in this,
yes,
this story. And that's a large reason why Lauren decides to go to disguise herself as a man and operate as a man outside the walls. And she's able to mostly pass.
Yeah.
Because she's tall.
Right.
But this seems like as great of a threat as the interracial couple aspect. I think there was a line about like whether it's a homosexual relationship or not, like they don't take kindly to like mixture.
Right. And I know that a lot of people, of course, Octavia Butler is absolutely adored in science fiction circles for, writing books like this where, that do center on people of color who have not historically been very well served by science fiction or many other genres as well. But kind of, I don't know, in this book, I felt that race was both like just an incidental thing, like, oh, these characters happens to be a very diverse group of characters, but also feels very central. This idea of in this disaster, these really ugly tendencies come out.
Yeah.
But they are strong. Her new group is very strong because they have all people from all these different backgrounds, and they're not only tolerant but sort of embracing the different strengths that would provide them.
Interracial, intergenerational, like mixed gender,
different backgrounds, people's different experiences,
education levels.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have Bankole, who's a doctor who would be incredibly valuable. If there's that's a great person to have.
Yeah.
That's like one of the major issues.
And Lauren herself, who's very learned in the ways of, starting gardens and,
extremely well read, extremely educated,
history and everything. Like she's just generally a very smart person. And I think that's largely why people follow her. She's really smart without, like she's welcoming and she's charismatic. She's able to convey. She's just an amazing communicator, like her dad, Even
though she has everything working against her, she's Black, she's a woman, she's young, and she has something that is arguably a disability.
Yeah.
So
disability superpower.
Right.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't know, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I know Octavia Butler is known for centering on people of color.
There were moments in the book that, I was thinking about what N.K. Jemisin said in her, at least in my copy, it's the foreword, where she was talking about there are moments where Lauren really doesn't feel like a teenager. It sounds like Octavia Butler writing what she imagines a teenager might sound like. But then there were moments that really did strike me as being very from a teenager's perspective, like when she's wishing she could speed up time, and she talks about that in the context of Keith. Keith is just wanting to be a man. He's wanting the power of manhood so much that he's willing to do the dumbest things and put everyone at risk to get that power.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting to make your character someone who is sort of on the cusp of adulthood.
Yes.
But isn't there and doesn't really have power,
Yeah, and I think she also grows up very quickly because she tries to, in that scene you mentioned that she's trying to talk to Joanne and talk to one other person about this secret that she's keeping, her new belief system, and then broadly the idea that they need to get out of there. And she tries to bring Joanne in, and then Joanne goes and tattles a very teenage experience. And then she's sort of, resentful after that. That is absolutely something that would happen to a teenager.
I'll never trust her again. Right. I can't believe I even trusted her again.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, the betrayal of the friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess, one other thing I think that is notable is Shirley. I can't imagine we're not supposed to connect these dots. So she has her father, and she loves her father, and then she loses her father, and then she takes up with a man who is very much old enough to be her father.
Well, she really has lost then two parental figures. She never really got to know her mom at all.
Right.
So she had Corey as sort of a surrogate mom, but didn't have a mother. Her mother was dead before she was, or as she was, she died in childbirth or something.
I don't remember when the mom
died. I don't know
died.
if we even know. Maybe I won't say that, but Yeah. So, I mean, she's lost 2 parental figures in her life. It makes sense that maybe she'd be seeking that even unconsciously
Yes.
in others, you know?
And then he's unaware that she's as young as she is because she obviously doesn't seem like that.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't expect the leader of this group to be this 18-year-old.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I do think there's something there. That actually caught me by surprise. I didn't think that their connection was going to be romantic, but
I started to think that when she was like, there's something about his smile and, you know, but then I actually was reading it as like, is this a threatening figure? Is he like,
Me too.
You know, but that's how it would be. You just wouldn't know.
Right.
Only time will tell, you know?
And there aren't a whole lot of options, I guess. So maybe, and you're in a heightened emotional state. So probably it's likely a lot of people are like coupling up, like Harry and Zara immediately couple up. And
Yeah.
you know.
And while he's incredibly educated, it makes sense that she would gravitate toward him intellectually.
Right.
So
He's like maybe the one person that can keep up with her on
Yes.
that footing.
exactly.
No one else necessarily can.
Yeah.
Although I do like that you have like that she, you know, she's like, I wish I had known Zara before. I didn't realize she had this background that is incredibly relevant because of course she's just like one of the wives of I can't remember his name now,
Richard or something?
Richard something. Yeah, who is in the town and is just like openly practicing polygamy and buys her from her
buys
mom.
her. Yeah. Like chattel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then she has this like very worldly sensibility about like, you know, she's very tough. And then Lauren's like, oh, I didn't like, we would have had this connection. And suddenly you're left with the remnants of your community. It's just your best friend's boyfriend and cousin. And then Zara, who's just like this random lady in town. And suddenly you're in a group together and people are unexpectedly useful.
And they make a really good trio because you have, you know, Zara, who is streetwise because
Yes.
she grew up in that environment. And then, what's his name?
Harry.
Yeah. And then Harry, who is more sheltered.
Yes.
And he's still, he doesn't, yeah, he's not very prepared and
No.
he's has bad instincts.
He's too trusting and he doesn't like, I think he's like feels a little alienated from Lauren, some of the decisions that she makes.
And
but,
Lauren is kind of in between those two things.
right.
She's the mediator. She's not quite as hardened and streetwise as Zara, but she's also not as naive as Harry.
No, and she has the knowledge that you would need to succeed in planting and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and then she's just like charismatic. So they're like, oh, let's stick together and rebuild from the remnants.
Charismatic and resourceful and careful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I notice is, you know, it is a science fiction novel in some ways. You do see some like the near future tech. You know, you see there's like the little earpiece that's like a radio.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's like the multi-sensory television that somebody has that's like the entire wall, and people like watch the news on it, and
Right.
it has like haptics and stuff, which reminded me of like if you've ever been to the Sphere in Vegas.
Oh, I've never been to Vegas.
That's what I thought of right away because it's very immersive, and then like the chairs have haptics, and I thought of that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, of course there was nothing like that when Octavia Butler was writing, but and then hyperempathy feels sort of sci-fi-y, but for the most part, it's really focused on the characters, the story, the environment, less so. You know, this is a world that hasn't had the opportunity to develop much tech.
No.
Although they do have a more advanced space program than we do.
Yeah, and the goal of the society is very science fiction-y to like, or the goal of Lauren's religion is science fiction-y to let's go to other planets.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very grounded, very human story. Perhaps, yeah, more speculative.
I think it's really symbolic in a way that the novel concludes with a funeral. It's like a funeral and a planting of seeds, both. It's sort of saying goodbye to the loved ones that they've lost while also planting seeds for the future and knowing that they're, at least Lauren is anticipating the beginning of a new era, of a new community, of hopefully a better time of more prosperity and safety. So
sewing, like from
yes,
the title.
Yes, from which she borrows from like Christianity, the Bible. And interesting that the novel itself ends with the parable of the sower. Like, I would have expected it to end with one of her verses. Instead, it ends with the parable of the sower.
Right, which is, yeah, it is very interesting. And one is left to think in the next book, which neither of us have read, then maybe then what will be reaped from this, from the sowing of these seeds, and what kinds of challenges is this new community going to face?
Right.
Certainly there will be challenges. It was hard enough for them to get there, but it's all about, planting these seeds. Yeah, and one gets the sense that Lauren could be a heavily mythologized figure later.
I think Octavia Butler says that at some point. She says once people forget how human she was,
right,
she could easily be seen as a god.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
I see her as more of a prophet.
Right.
It's like she's receiving the wisdom of this idea of God has changed. She seems to think that she's not creating this thing. That somehow this religion or these beliefs already exist out there as truths that she's able to then take from the ether, put into verse and spread to others, and that she's not actively creating this religion.
Yeah, and rather just sort of unveiling it for others.
Like translating it from the cosmos somehow.
Yeah.
So then I see her then as more of a conduit or a prophet, less of the God. For her, God has changed. God is a force,
right,
outside of oneself.
Right, but then later with these, you could see as generations from then, if they're still using the Earth Seed book, then of course there'll be all sorts of things.
She'd be like a Christ-like figure.
Exactly.
And it's a beautiful ending, and it feels like a catharsis after all of the trauma and the horror, that we've seen Lauren go through and the people around her. It's really healing to sort of end with that, the funeral, which is a proper goodbye, and then sort of the beginning, the looking to the future and having a sort of hopeful view.
Yeah, like closing the book on what they've experienced and kind of trying to clear some of that pain away. And especially because so many of the awful things that have happened to people are things that no one, as we've talked about, no one is going to get answers. Emery has lost 2 sons. She's never going to find them. She had to accept that.
Yeah, you just have to let go, say goodbye.
Lauren will never know exactly what happened to her father. And perhaps, and not Keith, although we have more information about but there just are no definitive answers for a lot of these painful things.
Yeah. Interesting on the journey when those guys are kind of combing through looking for people to rob on the highway. And she's like, this is what Keith was probably or would have become had he been allowed to live.
Yes.
But yeah, she has to kind of say goodbye to and sort of tie a knot on that part of her life.
And provide closure not just for herself, but the Bancole is not going to be able to, presumably won't be able to figure out what happened to his sister and his sister's family.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a devastating book, but also just so incredibly well done. And it's clearly a masterpiece.
And perhaps the most devastating part of reading this is knowing that Octavia Butler died before she could complete this series, which just is just awful.
Oh, I really wish. Imagine what she could have. She was only 58 when she passed away. Imagine what we could have gotten had she been able to live her whole life.
I know. I feel like this is me. This is my first time reading anything that she wrote, and then you're like, wow, this is really great. And then I looked her up, and I thought I knew that she had died, but I did not realize it was so soon, and that she had to leave this series unfinished.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah, I think Parable of the Trickster was the next one she was going to work on.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just sort of a fragmentary thing.
Yeah.
I still want to read the next one, and then of course like her other
Kindred
books
would be another one to read. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what a powerhouse, and we're fortunate to have what we do have from her. So, and great pick to the patrons who voted for it. This book, next month's book is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So that's for June.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. So that's the next one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
It won the poll.
I
thought you were watching the poll too. But.
Oh, I saw it I am a patron and practice what you preach. so I'm in fact also a patron. I saw that in my email, and I meant actually to vote for that one because I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Oh, the poll is now closed, but good to know that you would have voted for the winner.
Yes. Okay. So that's very exciting.
Yeah. So that I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a really fun reread, and I'm probably going to watch Blade Runner so we can have kind of talk about how there's the conversation between both of them. But
endlessly interesting film, Blade Runner, also Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Well worth revisiting.
Yep. So a classic science fiction novel coming up. And the poll for next month, the July book, is now open. So if you're a patron of Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club, head on over to cast your vote.
And if you are, I think if you're a patron, you can get involved in the Discord community where a lot of very insightful conversations are happening. So you should check that out too.
Yes. And I think that concludes our little discussion. Yeah, so I look forward to next month, and happy reading.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah. And that's a wrap on Parable of the Sower. I look forward to reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep with you next month. Check out the video description below for a link to buy the book if you're looking for a way to support independent bookstores and not Amazon. Or better yet, go on down to your local library and check it out if they have it available. Thanks again to my patrons on Patreon for supporting this book club. Special thanks to Bert, Orlando, Mr. Powers, Frank, Juan, Thomas, David, Henry, and Zekum. Looking forward to the next book. Until then, keep reading, keep looking up, and I'll see you next time.